As scary as things seemed from yesterday's overview of the Cold War, there is kind of a weird balance to it. Two diametrically opposed, well-matched sides, both of them pushing to exert their influence wherever possible. The College Board wants you to be able to recognize the effects of the United States or the Soviet Union attempting to exert their influence on one another or other parts of the globe. Today, we review the effects of the Cold War. This is another impossibly large topic, so I'm going to try to break it down for you. So let's break it down into the two actual things the College Board mentions here. First, nuclear proliferation. Hey, another one of those scary words, proliferation. This isn't just a buildup of weapons. Think back to World War I. The biggest, baddest, newest weapon around was the dreadnought. A feat of modern naval destruction, these things were cutting edge. There was even an arms race to see who could build the most of these bad boys before Otto von Bismarck's premonition about a global war came to fruition. Back before World War I, everyone was working to control the seas. And the leaders in dreadnought production were the two largest industrial powers in Europe, Great Britain and Germany. Before 1914, Germany had 17 dreadnoughts. Britain had 29. That's a buildup. But for Cold War weapons, the word buildup just doesn't do it justice. It was a proliferation. There's a word in there to help you out. Prolific. This was a prolific buildup. By the end of Unit 7, the global conflicts, there were only 3 nukes that were ever set off. Trinity in New Mexico, Little Boy in Hiroshima, and Fat Man in Nagasaki. And with the New World Order we talked about yesterday between the United States and the Soviet Union, the proliferation was on. The goal? Build your nuclear arsenal to such a prolific strength that just having it would deter others from attacking you. Check out this chart. That's a proliferation. And these aren't like dreadnoughts, which prove to be too sinkable to use in actual combat. Every nuke is a Thanos-level threat, and each side is building up a prolific arsenal of thousands. The best argument I ever heard for this idea of deterrence was from the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, under JFK and LBJ, but back in the Cuban Missile Crisis. And in this case, it's from the American perspective. Normally we hear it from the Soviet perspective, like, we build our nuclear arsenal up so much that the Soviet Union would be deterred from attacking us. But during the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was actually just the opposite. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a scary 2 weeks in November of 1962, when the United States observed Soviet nuclear weapons being set up in Cuba. The crisis was that our ideological enemy, the Soviet Union, now had nuclear weapons in direct range of most of the continental United States. Eventually, cooler heads prevailed. The Soviet Union removed their nukes from Cuba, and we removed our 100+ missiles from Turkey. But it was touch and go there for a minute. Historians often point to this moment as the closest we ever got to total nuclear war. But why did it not come to that? Answer: nuclear proliferation and deterrence. McNamara said that the main reason we didn't immediately attack Cuba and destroy those missiles is because we couldn't be sure that we would get them all. We, the United States, were deterred from attacking Cuba because of the nuclear weapons there. So even though we had about 26,000 nuclear weapons in 1962 and the Soviet Union only had about 3,000 nuclear weapons is still a prolific number. Second thing to know about the effects of the Cold War: proxy wars. I'm going to use my powers of deduction here to assume that your teacher went over both the Korean conflict and the Vietnam conflict, both of which were in some way a proxy war. How do I know that? Because that's what my teacher did back in the 90s. So I'm going to do you a favor. Let's turn to the most overlooked region in all of AP World History, Latin America. Let's focus on the proxy war in Nicaragua. First of all, what's a proxy war? Proxy is a scary word. It just means substitute. A substitute teacher serves as your teacher's proxy when they're not there. They are authorized to act on behalf of your teacher. So a proxy war is a war fought between two substitutes. You heard about the nuclear proliferation situation a minute ago? So that idea of the United States versus the Soviet Union really only happens in movies. But proxies of the United States and proxies of the Soviet Union will fight a lot. From 1945 to the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, there are at least 60 different proxy wars. But today we focus on one, Nicaragua, and more specifically, the Contras. No, stop. The Nintendo classic Contra took place in the year 2633, so it's completely different. Nicaragua had been in control of a dictatorship since the interwar period back in Unit 7. From 1936 to 1979, Nicaragua was controlled by one single family. And it was as corrupt and oppressive as you could imagine one family ruling your country for over 40 years in a row. But it was supported by the United States. The economy of Nicaragua was massively dependent on U.S. business interests. Remember economic imperialism from a few weeks ago? This is that. But in 1979, the evil dictatorship was overthrown by the Sandinistas. Yes! Ooh, but the Sandinistas were Marxists. And capitalist America can't just invade Nicaragua, right? We need a proxy. In this proxy war, our proxy was the Contrarrevolution, aka The Contras. The Contras were a collection of US-backed right-wing rebel groups who tried to take down the Marxist Sandinistas. This is a perfect example of a proxy war. We supported the Contras, and the Soviet Union supported the Sandinistas. And like so many other proxy wars, you don't really get to pick who your side is. Are you against the Marxists? Great. We're friends now. But far too often the group that we supported, because they didn't like the Marxists also, was not necessarily the nicest of people. The Contras committed a ton of human rights violations and even a bunch of terrorist acts. And President Reagan got into some pretty serious trouble for illegally funding the Contras after a congressional ban. But it's a proxy war, and they're our proxy. And after years of fighting, they held a national election in 1986 in which the Sandinistas got 67% of the vote. But by 1990, the Sandinistas had worn out their welcome. The economy had tanked behind an embargo from the United States on all things Nicaraguan. So in 1990, the Sandinistas lost the election and their control of Nicaragua. That's some more of that economic imperialism for you. So when it comes to the effects of the Cold War, focus on two things. Nuclear proliferation that essentially removed the possibility of a direct war between the United States and the Soviet Union, and proxy wars, where substitutes for the US and the Soviet Union fought along the same ideological lines like the Contras and Sandinistas in Nicaragua. Alright, so if the US is having to build up a massive nuclear arsenal and fight all these proxy wars all over the world, that must mean that communism didn't just stay in Moscow. So when and where did communism spread all over the planet? See you tomorrow.